Hello YouTube, welcome back to one of my Disney era rankings. This time, the ranking will be very interesting because we are talking about the Renaissance. This is after the Bronze Era and this is in between 1989 and 1999. A lot of good movies and successful movies from Disney's library came out in this era, and some of them are a lot of people's favorite Disney movies, mine included, so it'll be very interesting to rank. So before we go, I should talk about a couple things. One, I'm going to add an extra movie on here. It's not a movie that's technically not from this era, but I included it because I like it so much. And you'll see why when we get to it. And also, I'm going to be dividing this list into two parts, because I'm adding an extra movie on here, and there are 10 movies in here, so that would make 11 movies in total. You don't want to hear me talk about that long, do you? So, for all that out of the way, let's start ranking these films from my least favorite to my most favorite. Number 11, Pocahontas. This movie is so boring to me. I mean, there's only a few good things I find in here. I mean, the animation in here is pretty cool. I mean, I think it's some of the best animation on this list. Heck, and I would even say it's Sleeping Beauty quality. I like the Raccoon Miko, I think he's pretty cute. And I think the song "Cause the Wind" is great. Nothing else in the movie really matches that. Uh, so the characters in here are pretty wooden and one-dimensional to me, with me finding Pocahontas an okay Disney princess, but nothing really special, and I can barely remember anything about John Smith. I also think the villain in here sucks. I mean, he's just a one-dimensional, greedy villain who's not that intimidating, and I don't like his design. And yeah, it's just pretty boring. The songs in here range from bad to great, with me finding Cause of Wind great, but most songs in here are just eh. That's how I would describe this movie. Eh. Eh characters. Eh story. It's just not that good. I think I've talked about worse movies on my YouTube channel before, but this is probably the one I find the most boring. It's not that good and I wouldn't recommend it. And I don't find it that interesting at all. Number 10, The Rescuers Down Under. So, this is just the average Bronze Era movie that happened to release during the Renaissance, and it shows in its quality. I mean, this movie opens amazingly with this boy flying on a bird, which has a lot of amazing shots and music. And I should also mention that the music in here is fantastic, because it has a cinematic feel to it, and you know how much I love that. Plus, I still think Bernard and Bianca are still pretty likable and interesting main characters. I also think the villain in here is really good and intimidating, and they use him well. But everything else in here is just average. I mean, the main character is this boy, but he's just this self-insert for the audience to insert themselves in and relate to. And he's not that interesting because of that. And they've spent a lot of screen time on him, and this leads to the most major flaw of the movie. They spend a lot of screen time on the uninteresting boy, while they don't spend a lot of screen time on the rescuers. And the movie called The Rescuers Down Under. So that leads to the movie just feeling stiff at times because I don't really care about this boy. I care about the rescuers, and they push aside the other characters because of it. I mean, there's this one Australian mouse that I really like that only has a few screen time because of that problem. Well, at least to me. So, this movie is just another average Bronze Era movie that just happened to release in the incredible Renaissance era. If you like it, I know there's a cult following like Sword of the Stone, that's fine. I mean, I just think it's okay, but it's nowhere near anything above it on this list. So, it's just another average movie that's probably better than the first, but not that better. Number 9, Mulan. So I think this movie is very good, but I just don't think it's among the best from Disney. So first off, what I like about this movie. I think this movie has great female representation. Because it's not like, oh my god, look at this female fighting in the war. Aren't we progressive? Let's give ourselves a packet. No. It's more of Mulan doing what she thinks is right by serving the army and taking her father's place. Because she cares about him. And I also think Mulan is a very well written character and is very interesting. I also think Shang is pretty good as well, and I like the other people in the army. I like Mushu, but he can be kind of annoying at times. Kind of like Donkey from Shrek, which Eddie Murphy also voiced. And I'm not a big fan of this cricket, because his only purpose in the movie is to ruin Mulan's chances as a matchmaker, and nothing really else, just to react to stuff. And I also think the villain here is because he's just has an intimidating design and doesn't really have that much of a personality. So, and I also think the soundtrack in here is a bit of a mixed bag. I mean, I think some of the songs in here are great, but some of the songs are also okay or feel way too short for their sake. And I also like how this movie takes place during the war, because it's very unique and puts a lot of high stakes in the movie. And I also really like the animation in here, because I like how it's a mix between Chinese and Disney animation. And it looks a lot like Chinese artwork, which I really like. So, I think this movie has a lot of things going for it. Great songs, great characters, and great animation. But it just suffers from some unnecessary characters, a weak villain, some okay songs, and yeah. This movie is very good. I can see why people would put it high on the list, but for me, there's some negatives that make me put it low on the list. I still think it's a good movie and I recommend it, but I just don't think it's among the best on this list. Number 8, a Goofy movie. So this was a surprise Disney movie I mentioned earlier. I put it on the list because, although it's not part of the Disney Animation Library, I still think it has the quality of one of their films. And I also just really like the movie in general. And also, I think this is the best parent-son bonding movie I've ever seen. What I mean by that is that I've seen some movies that are about a parent and son bonding. And I think this is the best example of that. I think it's the best example of that because, although Goofy and Max disagree about what they want, the movie still makes them likable and you sympathize with what they want. And also, I think this movie has some great characters, which makes it pretty likable. And I also think it has a great heart. And I think this movie has a very underrated soundtrack. There are only a few movies in here, which is kind of one of the reasons why this movie is low. But the songs in here are really good with the ones they picked out. It's honestly, the Goofy movie shouldn't be this good. A movie about Goofy. And so why is it so low on the list? So there's this road trip scene in the middle of the movie, and they stop some places which look very interesting, but they are only in a montage. Like, I wanted to see more from them, honestly. They look pretty fun and interesting, honestly. Just make some shorts about them. I don't know. And also, I think animation in here is pretty average. I mean, it makes sense because this was animated by a company that specifies in the Disney animated DVD sequels, but it just looks okay in here. I think it's the worst animation on this list, honestly. So, I think this movie has some great heart, great characters. Oh, I forgot to mention, the humor in here is amazing. I laughed out loud a lot of times in here. I honestly think it's the second funniest Disney movie. We're on the funniest in the next era. But, yeah, this movie is very fun, heartwarming, and very funny. And I think it should be considered part of the Disney Animation Library. Although, this movie suffers from only a few songs, and some very okay animation, and a road trip I wanted to see more of. So yeah, this movie is very good, and I recommend it. It definitely should be part of the Disney Animation Library. Number 7, Hercules. So like Mulan and Goofy, I think this movie is pretty good, but I don't think it's among the best from Disney. So first off, let's talk about what I like. So first off, the animation here is really good, because I love how it's like Greek inspired and Disney animation inspired, and they blend together, and it looks really cool. And I also think the soundtrack in here is pretty cool, because it's narrated by a gospel choir, and that's pretty cool. I mean, most of the songs in here are really good. And let's talk about the characters. I think Hades is a great villain in terms of design and humor, because he's just a great villain. And also, I think Phil has a great personality. And plus, he's voiced by Danny DeVito. Do you need further explanation on why he's really good? And I also really like Megara, because she is really sassy and really fun to watch. Well, here's the thing though. Of all these likable characters, the only character in here I don't like is the main character, Hercules. He just doesn't have much of a personality aside from being heroic and cocky. That's it. He's just kind of a blank slate. I mean, in this movie there's so many likable and interesting characters, but the main character himself, not really that interesting. Yeah. And I also don't like how this movie has a very rushed climax. I mean, at one point in the climax, the Titans are evading Olympus and Hades is invading Olympus too. Well, in the other half of the climax, Hercules invades the underworld and fights off Hades. These feel like two different climaxes, and it feels like they wanted to do them both, but they just didn't know how to, so they just mashed them together. So it feels very rushed. So yeah, Hercules is a great movie with likable characters and some very good music and some very good animation, but it just suffers from a very weak main character and a rushed climax. It is a movie I would recommend, but I don't think it's among the best from Disney. Number 6, Tarzan. So I was surprised by how much I liked this movie upon revisiting it. I mean, I knew I liked it, but not as much as I do now. So the thing I find really good about this movie is Tarzan's character arc, about being a gorilla or a human. I find it really compelling and well written, and I think he's a really good character. I also think Jane's really likable and interesting. I also really like Tarzan's mother, because how important of a role she plays in the movie. And yeah, the only character in here I really don't like is Clayton, who is the villain, because he isn't really that intimidating and isn't really that good of a villain, honestly. And also, I think the jungle in here is really beautiful to look at. But some of the best animation on this list. And there's some shots in here that I think are some of the best animation in Disney, in my opinion. And also, the soundtrack in here is really good, but here's the thing. When I hear it in the movie, it just sounds weird, because I'm hearing Emmy Award-winning artist Phil Collins in the middle of a Disney movie, and it just doesn't sound right. Like, I could have wanted the characters sing it. I wouldn't mind seeing Tarzan sing, in my opinion. But yeah, with only that, just a weird-sounding soundtrack and a bad villain, this movie is really good, and it's honestly a really good movie. I recommend it. It's the first 8 out of 10 on this list. And you know that when there's a top 5 coming, and the movie that's number 6 is an 8 out of 10, there are some great movies on this list. But as for Tarzan, it's a really good movie, and I would recommend it.